Chinese leadership in their preparation for the current National People's Congress and the associated meeting of the Chinese Political Consultative Conference have indicated they're going to make some changes in the way the government is organized. And, of course, personnel changes that were basically decided last fall before the Party Congress are now to be announced at the end of these two sessions. The consolidation of the government, sounds like it has potential for reform, but we've seen consolidations before that didn't produce much reform at all. And so it's one of these things where we're going to have to watch and see what the results show. The more consequential set of meetings is widely believed to be next fall, October, November, when they have the so-called third plenum, the third full meeting of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. And that's when the people who come to office this week will present their ideas going forward for the next 5 years. And that will be a much better test of whether or not real reform and real change is coming. Well, this is a big change in the personnel, not so much new people as a reshuffling of people in new jobs. It could offer the opportunity to make adjustments in foreign policy, but I don't think the incentives are there for China to make policy changes. They're pretty comfortable with where they are. They've been having rough relations with some of their neighbors, but they're basically gaining on their neighbors in terms of economic weight and military capability. And so I think their general thrust of their policy allows them to focus on domestic issues first and to leave foreign policy pretty much to caretakers. Well, I think he's telling us and the people at home that he's not in America's hip pocket, that he has a different agenda. He's not going to just go to Moscow. He's going to go on to South Africa, visit 2 other African countries, and then go to this conference called the Boao Forum in southern China, where a host of leaders from many smaller and less consequential countries will be gathered. He's not making his first trip to Seoul, Tokyo, Washington. He's trying to signal something different. What that'll amount to over time, beyond the initial symbolism, is hard to assess, because in each of those areas, there's room for Chinese economic interaction, greater energy and commodities from Russia, South Africa investments, African investments, but there's not a great deal of strategic potential. Even with Russia, the differences between the people in Moscow and the people in Beijing are as big as the similarities. They both have today, Moscow and Beijing both have tactical things in mind. They work together on Syria against what they think is Western efforts to undermine the regime. They have some tactical interests. I think the Chinese would like to get the Russians involved on their side of the split with the Japanese over the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands. So there's some tactical opportunities coming. North Korea is another one. They're limiting the sanctions on North Korea to help protect that regime from instability. There is a risk. I mean, in the case of the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, the fishing season starts next month. And so we'll see large numbers, mostly Chinese and Taiwanese fishermen going there. Japanese tend not to go there because it's contrary to the winds and the currents to sail all that way. And when boats start mixing it up, and you've got Chinese surveillance ships and Japanese Coast Guard ships and overhead aircraft, the potential for accidents that escalate is real. Now, do governments want to go to war over these islands? Absolutely not. This is, I think, the question is, can we manage these frictions so that they don't erupt in spurts of damaging effects, such as loss of life among the ships? Well, in North Korea, we've had a phenomenon in recent weeks since the third nuclear test from the North Koreans, of many more outspoken items appearing in the Chinese non-official media, being very critical of North Korea, calling for an end to the special relationship between Beijing and Pyongyang, for a reduction in aid or an end to aid, or even cutting off all relations. And in one article last week, which caught a lot of attention, calling for reunification on the terms of the South, not the terms of the North, of the Korean Peninsula. These are radical views. Unfortunately, they're more likely to be a reflection of the views of people in China who would like to see reform both abroad and at home, and who are not eager to see the Communist Party retain its monopoly on power. And the people who hold power in China will view them just as that, people who want to change the political situation. And so these views will be viewed as inhospitable, and shifting China off its preoccupation with preserving the stability of the regime in North Korea, while occasionally tweaking it with sanctions to send a reminder to pay attention to what Beijing thinks, I think is where they want to stay. Now, new people will be in new offices in the next few weeks, and we'll see if there's some adjustments. But I think fundamentally the Chinese policy is likely to remain on course. The new Chinese leader by signaling his first trip abroad to countries that have nothing to do with the U.S., is, I think, saying, look, I've dealt with the U.S., we've got them in their box, I'm going on to other things. I think the U.S. has a larger interest, or at least in my view should have a larger interest, in trying to engage Mr. Xi earlier and try to put on the table some of the areas of conflict and potential conflict that have emerged in our relationship. Political leadership is not in charge of where the dynamics of the U.S.-China relationship are. They think they are. But in fact, the security forces in the U.S. and China are really driving the agenda, because as China modernizes its armed forces, the U.S. has to take, in its mind, countermeasures. And we have allies to work with on countermeasures. And we're into a competition that's very familiar from history, where the competition puts you into what's called a security dilemma, where you have to do more than the other guy and the other guy has to do more than you. And whatever you say in political circles about cooperation, managing competition, the competition's getting ahead of the cooperation. So this is a good time to try to get in and find some areas where the U.S. and China can emphasize cooperation and deconflict their forces. And places where this is important are Korean Peninsula, the Japanese islands, South China Sea, Taiwan, and we should have a serious political dialogue. Is that going to happen? I'm skeptical.